Warlocks have a brand new exotic armor piece arriving in the Edge of Fate expansion in the Eunoia exotic gauntlets, which with the console's pitch trait improves your Hellion solar buddy. Specifically, this trait makes it so that Hellion projectiles deal increased damage the further that they travel, and if they travel far enough, will actually fracture into multiple pieces of scorching shrapnel to rain on enemies with multiple projectiles instead of just the typical one. Given that this exotic armor piece is all about the Hellion aspect, there are only two subclasses where this is applicable in any capacity, with Solar and Prismatic. Initially, I wanted to take this exotic in the Prismatic direction due to the fact that these days, in most situations, Prismatic simply has so much more to offer than a mono subclass, considering that on Warlock, Prismatic, in conjunction with the Hellion aspect that you would run for this exotic armor piece, you can also run things like Feed the Void to get an enhanced Devour on any ability kill for full HP heals, and tons of grenade energy on any subsequent follow-up kill while in possession of the initial buff. Furthermore, the suite of fragments that you have available to you is generally better than that of Solar, with things like the Facet of Hope to grant increased class ability regeneration rate, which is a perfect pairing with a build that focuses on the Hellion solar buddy that comes out when you do cast your class ability. My issue with looking in the Prismatic direction for this exotic armor, though, is that in any build that I put together for it, I just found myself asking why I wasn't using an exotic class item instead that could give me ability spam through things like the Spirit of Inmost Light in conjunction with another spirit that could give me increased super damage, grenade damage, or so on and so forth. Yes, I wouldn't be receiving the increased Hellion damage and fracturing projectiles from Eunoia, but I felt that in the long run I would easily make up for and even exceed that lost damage with the bonuses I would have from dishing out more abilities from Inmost Light and the bonus super damage I could have from something like Star Eater paired along with it. So it was at this point that I remembered that the Pure Solar subclass could offer some things to a build revolving around the Eunoia that Prismatic could not, and that is the ability to have a much more support-centric kit and the ability to have significantly more ignitions firing off due to some of the fragments that are unique to Solar. The first of these fragments I'm looking to is the Ember of Benevolence, where anytime we apply Cure, Radiant, Restoration, Healing, or Revive an ally, we get an absurd amount of ability regeneration for all three of our basic abilities for 6 seconds. In conjunction with that, I wanted to try and play into all of the Scorching Shrapnel to try and create a ludicrous amount of ignitions by grabbing the Ember of Ashes to increase all of my Scorch Stack applications by 50%. Then, to make sure that our Phoenix Dive class ability was truly up 24/7 to always be available to use to re-summon our Hellion when it expires, I went with the Ember of Singeing for increased class ability regeneration anytime we apply Scorch to enemies. Then, in my final fragment slot, I went with the Ember of Torches so that I could not only obtain a weapon damage buff in the form of Radiant anytime I threw my melee at something, but also so that I could give Radiant to nearby allies to give myself another way to proc my Ember of Benevolence. To house these 4 fragments, I slotted in the Hellion aspect, obviously, in conjunction with the Touch of Flame aspect to empower my grenades, of which I decided to go with the Healing Grenade to play a bit more into the support role I was going for, and to have another way to apply a solar buff to allies to proc the Ember of Benevolence. But unfortunately, despite my best efforts to tune things and make this exotic work, I wasn't the biggest fan of it for a lot of reasons, many of which I expressed to Bungie both while I was at the capture event and provided in my post-event feedback survey. So hopefully some of these woes will be fixed or tuned by the time y'all get to experience the exotic on the release of the expansion on July 15th. But I actually need your help as well to make this exotic more exciting, which we'll get to in a second. First, let's identify the pain points of this exotic armor. The first issue I had with this exotic is that I was simply straight up not noticing the damage increase based on distance traveled in any capacity. Looking at the footage, I was legitimately hitting enemies for 249 damage with the Hellion, whether they were 40 meters away or directly in front of my face. This one I would honestly chalk up to the fact that this is an early playtest build of the game though, and will be fixed by launch. But it does leave me sitting with the question that I unfortunately forgot to ask during the capture event: how much does this exotic actually increase the damage of Hellion projectiles? Still, even in a world where it would increase it up to 100%, 200%, or even 400%, this exotic at its core feels really wonky to use. The thing about Hellion is that it does not have infinite range. In fact, it can only spit out fireballs to targets that are about 45 to 55 meters away. The problem with this fact, in tandem with the gameplay that this exotic encourages, is that you want to be as far away from enemies as possible to get the maximum travel distance on the Hellion projectiles and subsequently the largest damage increase, but if you are 1 meter too far away, then your Hellion is out of range and your damage with it immediately drops to 0 because it isn't even shooting. As a result, it creates this awkward distance guessing game where you are trying to be exactly the max distance away from enemies so that your Hellion projectiles have the most travel distance, but not 1 millimeter too far away, otherwise it might as well not even be there. And in a game like Destiny where you have so many things to worry about already, being the exact proper distance away to take full advantage of an exotic like this just feels awkward and very hit or miss unless you are running around scoped in with a Darcy through the entire activity so you can see exactly how many meters away you are from every single enemy. To a certain degree, you could make the argument that this exotic just requires players to be good at judging their distance, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I just feel like it's not a particularly enjoyable thing to play around so tightly. I do think there are ways that you can remedy this, however, for example, making the damage increased based on tiered zones instead of increasing the damage for every individual meter that you move away. So for example, if you are 45 to 55 meters away from a target, then you get the maximum available damage bonus, as opposed to getting a different damage bonus at 54 meters, a different damage bonus at 55 meters, and then the Hellion being out of range at 56, if that makes sense. But another issue I had with this exotic was the fracturing shrapnel that occurs when the projectile travels far enough, because in my experience, it just did not hit anything. Legitimately, I think in most situations, I would be lucky if like 2 of the 4 shrapnel projectiles ended up actually dealing damage to something. To put it simply, these projectiles need tracking of some sort or need to have a very large blast radius for splash damage, because in its current form, most of these projectiles are just finding themselves hitting the ground next to enemies to warm them up on a breezy day. But my final and most important issue with this exotic is that it simply feels like it isn't doing enough and isn't bringing enough benefits to the table. It needs something more going on with it, or honestly, maybe even 2 more things. It's a very passive exotic that doesn't really encourage any enjoyable and meaningful build crafting opportunities, and the passive benefit it provides isn't that impactful in and of itself. And even if Bungie does make the passive benefit it provides, the increased damage from travel distance, incredibly strong, I would still like to see some additional things added to it to truly make it an exotic worth using over other options. Just spitballing for a minute, but what if this exotic could also make it so that allies that step into your rifts or get hit by the cure of your Phoenix dive also receive a Eunoia Hellion, so that this exotic could then turn into a give Hellions to the entire team machine. From a balance perspective, I don't feel this would be too much of a problem, considering that the Arc Soul aspect on Arc basically already does that with its base functionality. You don't even need an exotic to get the benefit of being able to supply these elemental buddies to teammates with the Arc side of things, which is why I feel it wouldn't be a problem to add another feature on top of this to make this exotic truly stand out and feel unique. What this feature would be specifically, I am unsure, so I want to call on you watching right now to leave a comment down below to let Bungie know what you would like to see added to this exotic that would make you excited about using it without making the exotic too overpowered or too broken. Off the top of my head, I would love to see them play a little bit more into the shrapnel projectiles and perhaps have an extra benefit be provided if you land enough hits with the shrapnel projectiles. What this benefit would be specifically, I don't know, or if that's the direction they should go in, I also don't know. But please, if you have any ideas whatsoever, make sure to leave them down below, because if there is one thing that I learned from going to this feedback event to test out this exotic and record this footage to show to all of you, it's that Bungie truly does listen to feedback and loves when their passionate players get involved in feedback discussions in a civil and respectful manner. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to visit my channel to see a whole bunch of other pre-release Edge of Fate content, or just hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a great day.